All right, let's get started with our next session. Our next speaker is Christine Hult. Christine is an Emeritus faculty member of the English Department at Utah State University. She received her doctorate from the University of Michigan. Christine has written several successful writing textbooks, including the New Century Handbook and the New Century Pocket Guide for Writers, as well as researching and writing across the curriculum. Her research interests include computers in the writing classroom, writing in the disciplines, program and teacher assessment, and women in academia. She's the past editor of the Council of Writing Program Administrators Journal, the WPA Writing Program Administration, and is active in numerous professional organizations, speaking at conferences, chairing panels and programs, and leading workshops, including the National Council of Teachers of English, the Conference on Computers and Writing, the Council of Writing Program Administrators, the Alliance for Computers in English Studies, and the Conference on College Composition and Communication. Her session today is entitled Teaching the YouTube Generation. Christine, are you ready to begin?
Hi, everyone. Are we there?
We're there. Thank you, Christine. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm so glad to be here. I'm happy also to follow Kim Flatchman, who gave the previous hour's talk, because I think what I have to say fits very nicely with what Kim had to say. Whether you're teaching in a traditional classroom or online via the internet, teachers today are facing a very different crop of students from what we taught even 10 years ago. The current crop of students, which I'm calling the YouTube generation, has grown up not only with the internet and its social media, but also with smartphones and other devices that make communication instantaneous. We need to understand some of the key characteristics of these learners. What about the internet use for young adults in their 20s? According to Pew researchers, they average about 19 hours per week, which is about 3 hours per day on the internet. And this does not include mobile devices. So it's an incredible amount of time looking at computer screens. Well, what about those mobile devices? Cell phone use of the average American teen. We know it's a lot. I was shocked to see how much it is, though. Approximately 2,500 texts per month, which averages out to about 80 texts per day. So when you see those kids on their phones all the time, you know this is what they're doing. And as net use has increased, so has TV viewing. Approximately 5 hours per day on average for the American public to be watching TV. Screen viewing of all types comes out to about 8.5 hours per day. Think of your own screen viewing. Right now we're on screens ourselves, and so we Americans spend a lot of time looking at computer screens. So what should we as teachers be doing to reach this generation? The medium in which we teach writing needs to change to meet these students where they live, and that is online. And Kim made this point in the earlier hour as well. Students will still be expected to write print-based text, but they'll also be writing and reading web-based text. In this talk, I'll describe how today's online readers approach text and how this change in reading processes impacts not only what we teach, but how we teach it. If you're considering moving a class online, or if you already teach online courses, you know that you need to think differently about the teaching and learning interface in this kind of an environment. But not everything changes when you move a class online. More than ever, students need to learn the core principles of rhetoric, since reading and writing now occur in such varied media. Students need to understand the different writing contexts that they're going to encounter in their lives, including public contexts, academic contexts, formal and informal contexts. They need to learn how to adapt their writing to the genre, purpose, and audience of each writing situation they encounter. And they need to learn that the writing content and the form of their writing must be appropriate to the context. I'm going to take a minute here to turn on my pointer. The teaching of writing should be based on the same rhetorical principles that come down from us from ancient Greece, which many of us have been using for a long time in the field of composition. Now, however, we need to become techno-rhetoricians. This means that we use multimedia technology to aid in learning as well as in delivering the content. Using some version of the rhetorical triangle, which I'm showing here, students can be introduced to the basic ideas of rhetoric. That is, they learn to pay explicit attention to the logic of their arguments, as well as to their own persona or ethos that they're presenting in their writing, and to the audience that they're writing to and the kinds of appeals that will move or sway that audience. It doesn't matter what students are writing or what the medium, anything from a text message to a formal research paper, these principles still apply. Here are two examples of online text with different rhetorical contexts, a blog site and a website. When writing a blog, the writer needs to consider the 3 points of the rhetorical triangle: audience, purpose, persona, and logic. Of particular importance in a blog site is persona, the person who's writing the blog. The writer wants to record something about his or her experiences, and consequently the emphasis is on the persona of the writer. In this example, a friend of mine, JR, blogs about the motorcycle trips he and his wife take to the national parks. In this case, they went on the Yellowstone ride. The text is descriptive and narrative with lots of embedded photos to record the trip for friends and family as well as for themselves. In the second example, from the American Cancer Society, this website needs to take into account its potential audiences and select information that is appropriate to the rhetorical context. Logic and persona are certainly important in this kind of informative website, but perhaps audience is the most important of all 3 items on the rhetorical triangle. The American Cancer Society, in producing their website, needs to carefully analyze the needs of the audience and anticipate those needs in the content and structure of the website. Here, for example, they say, how can we help you, whether you're explicitly talking to their audience? Here again, we're in the realm of rhetoric. When we're on the web, we notice times when our rhetorical expectations are violated. I'm sure you've all had experiences on the web, such as on Facebook, where you felt that something was posted that was not appropriate to the medium. Perhaps someone posted something that was overly personal or overtly political, and you reacted to it in a negative way. That person probably did not take the likely audience reactions into account. Nor was the person doing anything positive for his or her own ethos. Students who are online all the time need to learn the principles of rhetoric and make appropriate decisions regardless of the kind of media that they are using. So if the principles of rhetoric apply online as they do in print, what about the principles of reading? How do we read online? Is it the same as reading a print text? The evidence says that it's not the same at all. We read very differently online. The way people read and write is changed in fundamental ways by the internet. Hyperlinks change our experience of reading because they impel us forward in ways that regular text does not. Just think for a minute of your own experience of reading online. Maybe you're on a news site such as Google News or something like that. Think about how those clickable links there to videos and to audio and to more media impel you forward in ways that change the way that you read, and you no longer read in such a linear fashion. Instead, today's readers power scan and power browse. A study at San Jose State University looked at the reading habits of well-educated people, and when asked to characterize how their reading practices have changed, 81% reported that they were spending more time browsing and scanning and doing more nonlinear reading. According to Nicholas Carr in his book The Shallows, and I'm quoting here, scanning, once a means to an end, a way of identifying information for deeper study, has become an end in itself, our preferred way of gathering and making sense of information of all sorts, close quote. I find this very much describes how I'm reading these days, and it's quite different from the ways that I used to read. Reading online has changed the way that readers interact with text. Furthermore, reading is becoming a team sport, where readers interact with writers in online forums of all types. And there is a new ecology of interruption technology. This is Nicholas Carr's term for it. And as he also points out, the way people read and write has been changed by the internet, and the changes will continue slowly but surely as the words of books are extracted from the printed page and embedded in the computer's ecology of interruption technologies, close quote. Today's students are experts at exploring. They love to explore. They click. They learn by clicking. In fact, typically they learn by doing rather than reading through a manual first, as many of us are used to doing. And this learning by doing is touted as one of the defining characteristics of a digital native, which defines many of today's college students. And a digital native is someone for whom the digital world is, they were born to it, they're native to it. Because the way we read and write has changed, books need to change as well. They need to be designed to capitalize on those interruption technologies that Carr describes. Books need to become video plus books, or what Carr calls books. However, I don't think that the richness of the linear reading that we get from reading a regular book is necessarily lost in this kind of a book. This is essentially Nicholas Carr's argument in The Shallows. He thinks that reading online promotes a kind of a shallow reading, and other traditionalists also seem to lament this shift, arguing that the richness of deep linear reading is being lost. However, I don't think that reading online is impoverished. I think it's just different. In fact, over the last several years, educational researchers have discovered that carefully designed presentations which combine audio and video can, in fact, enhance students' learning. Current educational theories suggest that our brains use different channels for processing what we see and what we hear. And so the combination of audio and video can be enriching if done appropriately. Next, I'd like to watch an example of an instructional video that uses both audio and visual explanations to help students learn about writing thesis statements. After watching this video, I'll describe some of the important principles of multimedia learning using this video as a primary example. The video is about 3 minutes long, and I'll play it first without interruption. Then we can discuss some of the features of this type of interactive media that can aid in learning. And I would just suggest that perhaps you might need to adjust your audio for this particular segment of my presentation. I'm going to play it as loud as I can, but if you don't hear it very well, please turn up your audio. Here we go.
Sometimes the most intimidating part about an essay can be writing the thesis statement. The thesis captures the central argument of your paper, so it can be the most difficult sentence of all.
In this video, Justin will help me come up with a thesis for my politics paper. I want to write about global warming, so here's my first try. Global warming is an important issue today.
A common mistake is to assume that your thesis can be right or wrong. To make your paper interesting, your thesis should be contentious, meaning that someone might reasonably disagree with you. Think about it this way. It's boring to say something that everyone agrees with. A thesis statement like, global warming is an important issue today, doesn't really say much because very few people might disagree with it. It's also easy to assume that your thesis is contentious just because it contains contentious ideas. Mariah's essay is about global warming, definitely a divisive issue, but she still needs to make an argument of her own. She can still write about global warming, but she'll want to be more specific.
Okay, what do you think of this one? There are more news articles about global warming during heat waves than during cold spells.
That's an interesting idea, and maybe a good supporting detail for your paper. But alone as a thesis, it doesn't really work. Remember that the thesis describes the entire argument of your paper.
Okay, how about this? Though the threat of global warming is a long-term problem, people interpret it on a short-term basis, and the media has exploited the public's fears to sensationalize the issue.
This is much better, because you're making a debatable argument. As one sentence, though, it is a little long and confusing. Don't feel like you have to cram your thesis into one sentence. Sometimes, especially for longer papers, a two-sentence thesis is okay, because separating it out can clarify your argument.
Okay, how about this? The issue of global warming is a long-term problem, but the public interprets it on a short-term basis. As a result, the media has sensationalized the issue, creating an inflated sense of catastrophic change.
That sounds great. You've definitely made some interesting arguments about global warming. I'm not sure I completely agree, but that's okay because it's a good sign you're making a contentious claim. And by phrasing your thesis in two sentences, I can already tell it will be easier for you to write the paper. Your outline almost falls into place.
I see what you mean. Looking at this thesis, I think I know how my paper will work. First, I'll talk about how the public interprets global warming in the short term, and then I'll discuss the media's treatment of the issue.
You'll want to follow Mariah's lead when you're coming up with a thesis of your own. How can you tell if you have a good thesis? It should be contentious and specific, but not too specific. It should describe the entire argument you will develop in your paper. If you're having trouble, try talking it out with a friend or professor, like Mariah and I just did.
Thinking of a good thesis may have taken some time, but it's definitely worth the
effort. What's your reaction to this video? Let's look at it a bit more closely. First I'm going to change back my pointer pen here so that I can use that. For those of you who are used to teaching with print text, you may wonder how you even begin to think about incorporating interactive media into your teaching. Furthermore, how do we know whether or not a piece of multimedia instruction is effective? Fortunately, there's a long history from the field of instructional design that can help us to decide whether interactive media will be effective or not. Next, I'd like to share with you 8 sound principles of multimedia learning, which have been distilled from many years in the field of instructional design. These principles are summarized by Daniel Park in this book, Camtasia Studio 6. He's a noted instructional designer and corporate trainer. I'll discuss each principle in turn, along with an illustration of the principle from the video that you just watched. By becoming aware of these principles, you can begin to sort through the instructional options that are going to be cropping up and are beginning to crop up even now in the market, with an eye toward deciding which ones will be effective teaching tools and which may not be as effective. You may also wish to begin producing your own instructional media for online presentations and lectures. This is especially important for an important skill for teachers who are teaching online classes. The principles I'm going to talk about include the following. First is non-redundancy, segmentation, signaling, personalization, spatial and temporal contiguity, coherence, modality, and individual differences. I think it's important to spend time learning about what makes multimedia effective, since I also think this is the wave of the future for college textbooks. That is, to reach students online where they live, we need to be producing the kinds of books that Carr was talking about, video books. So the first principle is non-redundancy, and here's a screen from the video. People learn better when words are presented as verbal narration without the redundancy of the same information being presented as on-screen text. The screen should not be filled up with text. Rather, the audio should carry the message, and the visual information should reinforce it, as in the screen. Have you ever been to a PowerPoint presentation where the presenter simply read the points listed on the screen? That is redundant. Instead, the screen should be filled with visual media, whether it's a chart, a graph, an animation, a video, and the words should be narrated as audio to reinforce but not duplicate the learning. In the thesis video, I think they did a very good job of using the visual information to reinforce but not duplicate the audio information. The second principle is segmentation. People learn better when information is presented in bite-sized chunks and 2,000 characters per screen with no scrolling necessary. Notice how the information fits very neatly on this screen without having to scroll to another screen And it doesn't actually clutter the entire screen either. The screens from this video, I think, are pretty good examples of segmentation. The screen information is chunked to make each screen independent without too much information on any one screen. Think about the online books that you may have encountered in other situations. E-books have become a very popular way for publishers to share their information from their traditional print books. The problem that comes out with e-books is that they're on an orientation that's a page orientation, which is on the vertical, whereas as you see on the screen, such as this, the orientation is horizontal. And so what you end up with when you put a print book online without adjusting the information to fit the screen, is that you end up scrolling up and down a great deal in order to read all the information that's on the page. So the use of a PDF version of a print book it really violates the segmentation principle that we know should be there when you're creating something that's multimedia. And the third principle is signaling. People learn better when there are clear signals or advanced organizers, such as outlines, headers, and previews of content. We know this also when we're writing reports or things of a technical nature. We're taught to use signaling. Throughout the thesis video, the information is signaled to the reader. For example, in this screen, your thesis should be contentious. This forecast and the next few screens, which talk about the idea of how do you make something contentious. Principle number 4 is personalization. These are the two young people who developed this video that you just watched, Mariah and Justin. They were interns at Pearson Education for the summer and had the opportunity to work with me on a project we're doing for Pearson having to do with making a video book available to students. So people learn better when the presenter or the writer allows his or her personality to come through, and I think that Justin and Mariah did a very good job of that. The terminology and tone make them warm and approachable and feel like they're talking to students just as they are students themselves. They're real students facing the same kind of writing assignments and tasks that other students face, and they let their personalities shine through in this video. The personal voice and connection help students feel less intimidated and adrift in what can be an anonymous online space. Hearing an actual person speaking to you makes it begin to feel as though you're part of that online community rather than an isolated individual. And of course, the teacher, you, will bring your own personal approach to bear as well. In this webinar experience that you're having right now, it's a little bit odd for me to be talking without anybody listening to me, but I'm hoping that having the audio along with my PowerPoint rather than reading them makes it a more vivid experience for you. The next principle is spatial and temporal contiguity. People learn better when on-screen text is presented near any corresponding images. This is called spatial contiguity in this example. So the words here are contiguous or next to the visual in time and in space. This principle has been followed throughout the video. Whenever information needs callouts, the callouts are placed immediately next to the images they refer to so that students will understand what is being referenced. People also learn better when video animation and audio narration are synchronized. That is, they are played at the same time, temporal contiguity. When they're simultaneous, learners build strong connections between the words and the pictures. If they're presented sequentially or asynchronously, for example, pictures are shown and then the words played later, the pathways are not as strong. Not only are these two modalities present in the thesis video, they're presented at the same time or in contiguity, so that students learn by what they learn by seeing is reinforced by what they learn by hearing. The sixth principle is coherence. And we know all about coherence from what we teach in writing. The same principle applies when you're doing something that's multimedia. People learn best when the focus is on the materials being presented and extraneous information is eliminated. That's coherence in the multimedia world. The sample video I think, avoids using too many multimedia bells and whistles. It does use some, but I think they're moderately done and not overdone. They don't add irrelevant words, sounds, pictures, or music that might detract from the central message. If you've ever had the experience of going to some online training, sometimes the music in the background or the clicks and whistles and bells and so on that are added in do nothing but detract from what the meaning that is trying to be communicated. So we really want to think about coherence when we're doing something that's multimedia. And the seventh principle is modality. I hinted at this earlier. People learn better when the visual and the sound are presented together. Those are the two modalities, visual and auditory. When engaging with multimedia, both sight and hearing should be engaged. And when these two pathways are engaged simultaneously, the brain is more efficient at receiving both types of information at once. And you'll notice that in the video that I showed you, these two modalities do indeed complement each other. One final and not so surprising principle is that people learn differently. Some are more visual, some are more spatial, still others favor auditory channels of learning. Multimedia should be accessible to students with a variety of learning styles. Whether the student learns best through reading, viewing, or hearing, multimedia instruction should be compatible with the way students learn best. And multimedia products should be ADA compliant, that is, Americans with Disabilities Act. They should be accessible to all types of learners. For example, this video would need to be closed captioned for hearing impaired students so that those who were not able to hear the audio could also still understand the meaning that was being communicated. We know that the only constant when it comes to technology these days is change. Let me close with a thought from Stephen Johnson, found in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From. I found that reading Stephen Johnson was a good counterpoint for me after reading Carr's book, The Shallows. Carr really expressed some concerns about the kind of shallow thinking that the internet seems to promote, whereas Johnson talks about where good ideas come from. How does innovation actually happen? And he talks about the collaborative nature of knowledge and the importance of social media and social networking toward that community building of knowledge. And those of us in composition have talked a lot about the social construction of knowledge. So we're not unfamiliar with this idea either. So I think that we need to counterbalance the thought that perhaps learning is becoming more shallow with the idea that there's a great deal of positive to come out of the collaborative nature of knowledge. And I'll end with a quote from Stephen Johnson to leave us plenty of time for question and answer. It's one of the great truisms of our time that we live in an age of technological acceleration. The new paradigms keep rolling in, and the intervals between them keep shortening. This acceleration reflects not only the flood of new products, but also our growing willingness to embrace these strange new devices and put them to use. The waves roll in at ever-increasing frequencies, and more of us are becoming trained surfers, paddling out to meet them the second they start to crest. Close quote. So are you ready to surf? Let me hear from you, and I think Amy's going to moderate the questions.
I am, Christine. I'm going to, I'd like to start with a question of my own. You're talking about, and that last quote I think kind of sums this up too, the idea of acceleration and, you know, having to kind of take a spirit of willingness to embrace, to surf. Where do you think your students are with that? Do you get any pushback from them, or how do you sort of kind of bring them all on board with taking a really adventurous approach to technology?
Well, in my experience, the problem is not usually the students, unless they're older returning students, which I'm sure some of us have those as well. It's a generational kind of thing, I think. The newer students the digital natives that I talked about earlier in the presentation find this very natural to them. It's those of us who are not digital natives who have a much harder time with the new technologies and the pace at which change is happening. And I think we need to keep flexing our muscles, just like you know, an athlete training for a marathon or something. We just need to keep stretching those muscles and using them. And I really like Johnson's metaphor of surfing, because you've got to paddle out and meet the waves. You can't just wait for them to come to you, or you will never succeed at surfing. Sorry about all the sports metaphors, but that's kind of what's on my mind. And I think that students are very good at this. Notice how quickly they adopted the iPad technology and the iPhones, and whatever new thing comes down the pike, students are right there and after it. So I don't think they need a lot of motivation. But what they do need is to see the connection between the kind of rhetorical thinking that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that still applies no matter what kind of medium that they're using, that they still need to think about who it is that they're writing to and what purposes they're writing for. These are all important considerations. It doesn't matter what kind of media you're using.
Mm-hmm. So do you use traditional texts with them at all? Do you have them doing, or are they pretty much kind of fully immersed in, I know you showed the video and stuff like that. What other kinds of tools do you use in the classroom to get them expressing and coming along with their thinking?
Well, I like to teach in a computer classroom when I'm teaching face-to-face classes. I teach a lot of online classes as well, but I think they need to be exposed to all kinds of text, and I think Kim alluded to that also. So I certainly don't abandon the printed text. I think printed texts are very important, but I think we need to stretch beyond that and to use online text as well, because that's the world they live in, and that's where they're going to be finding a lot of their information. One interesting story that Steve Johnson tells in his book is about a young man that is a Rhodes Scholar, very, very smart young man, but he claims that he has never in his life read a book. All of his information has come from the internet. Everything that he knows and has learned in his quest to become a Rhodes Scholar has come from online sources. And so I think that's maybe an extreme case, but I think that students need to learn to interact with all kinds of text, and we as teachers owe it to them to be able to help them. So my recent projects have been trying to write things that combine the best of both worlds, the best of what you can read in the text with what you can learn in the video. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's some combination.
I'm kind of along those lines of combinations and conversions. Sean Walker is wondering kind of about your process of maybe converting a class from face-to-face to online. Do you do kind of a one-to-one conversion, or do you kind of start from scratch?
Well, there's a lot of things that I do in my class that are really the idea behind it is the same, whether I'm doing it online or doing it face-to-face. So, for example, if I'm having my students peer review, the whole idea of peer reviewing and its importance for helping students to understand audience and to read and comment on the work of their peers, that whole idea is the same. But the way that I deliver that idea is different. So if we're peer reviewing online, they may be, instead of talking face-to-face with each other, they may be speaking to each other about a paper in a chat room, or exchanging a paper in a discussion forum space and talking about it in a discussion forum. So I'm moving the kinds of tasks and teaching ideas that I use in my face-to-face class onto the online mediums, and not everything changes. What changes is the way I go about it, but the same kind of things I'm doing are happening. So in my online classes, I typically follow the same course of units that I would follow in my face-to-face classes, the same kinds of assignments. If I'm teaching a research writing class, I do a similar kind of a research paper project, because and I said this earlier, I think they need to learn how to interact with print text as well and write their own print text. but they would do it in the forum of the online classroom as opposed to the forum of the face-to-face classroom. And just a plug for Lynn McNeil, if anyone really wants to learn about online teaching, she's going to be giving the talk, I understand, this afternoon. And she's one of my former graduate students, and so we take a lot of pride in her at Utah State because she's taught for us for a long time and went on to get her PhD after doing her master's work with us, and then still teaches for us from Florida. She's a very, very good online teacher, and we'll, I know, talk about that in this webinar later today.
Yeah, she does a great job with that. I do hope people can hang around from that. It'll be a great complement to what you're saying here, Christine. Bonnie Boothroyd had a question about the principle of non-redundancy, and she wonders, for students that seem to need almost direct audio reinforcement of what they're seeing, if the audio is not duplicating the words on the screen, won't those students be at a disadvantage?
That's an excellent point, and I think what people who are designing multimedia products need to think about, and I always think about it when I'm working on it, is you don't want to have the audio and video redundant, but you do want to have it revisitable. So you want them to be able to revisit it in some other format later, so it goes by pretty quickly. So I like to have, as well as the video where I'm talking about something, I also like to have a print version that they can either download or print out. They can read it at their leisure, go back over it. So I think you need both. I really do. I think that's a really good point, because sometimes if the audio goes by very quickly, they may not catch it the first time. They can also go back and listen to it again. But what you don't want is to have a direct one-on-one correspondence between everything you see on the screen being read by the person who is doing the audio, because that's counterproductive. That doesn't reinforce the channels of learning. And there's been a lot of interesting brain research that studied this and how our brains work with these two different channels, and how having the two channels feeding you information at the same time, but through auditory and visual media, actually makes the learning stick better into our brains. And so that's what we're trying to do. But it is a balancing act for sure.
Yeah. Dan from Indiana University East is wondering, with more online sources being used, do you find that you need to spend more time discussing what makes a source credible, or that your discussion of that is different in some way than when you're talking about print resources?
Absolutely so. We really need kids to start thinking about and thinking very seriously about the things they're interacting with online, because when we see things online, we tend to think that they're credible, they're okay, but we have to have even a more critical eye than when we're looking at print text, because as we all know, the print texts have gone through a certain amount of background screening already, through the editorial process, through the peer review process, and all that, whereas things that are put on the web could be just somebody's opinion or idea. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we evaluate sources, and what's the difference between evaluating a print source and evaluating an online source. Should we be looking at them the same? I don't think we should. I think we should be asking different questions when we're looking at online sources, questions about who put up this site and what was their agenda for putting it up, questions about what kind of links are on this page and where does it link to and who links to it, and what does that tell us about what's going on this page. So I think that the evaluative tools, the critical thinking tools that we need to have in place, no matter what we're looking at, are still the same, but the questions that we would ask ourselves about an online source may not be the same as the questions we would ask ourselves about a print source.
Okay. We have time, I think, for one last question, and it's kind of a nuts and bolts question, Christine. It's about student videos. Darlene Proctor at Davidson County Community College is wondering, if you could talk a little bit about that specifically. Do you implement the students' production of YouTube videos, or do you help them produce the videos in the class itself, or how do you talk with them about that? How do you set that assignment up?
Well, I'm typically not having them produce videos for the class that that I would actually teach that, unless I'm doing a class in technical writing where we would be talking about making videos, video production. So I'm not doing this in a freshman class. The students that you saw on the video here were interns at Pearson, and were working with me on a project to do an online textbook that includes videos. So these are real students, but in this case they're working on a publishing project and not on a classroom project. So I'm not teaching them to write videos. I think Bruce Ballinger is going to talk a little bit about podcasting, though, and so you might get some insights there about how you could do podcasting with students. But I think teaching them how to write videos is a different course.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, you know what? I missed a question up here from Sean Walker that was a follow-up to his question about the online class. He's just wondering, do you find that students contribute more or differently in an online class, and specifically, do they interact differently with peer review in an online class as opposed to a traditional classroom?
Yeah, I think they do interact differently. I think you need to really set it up in a way that makes them be a little bit more sensitive than they might be inclined to be, because the distance that you sort of feel when you're in the anonymous world of an online class, or you can feel like you're anonymous, could lead to some kinds of more stringent or hurtful or less sort of moderated comments to your peers. Because you think about how things go in an online forum. People just say whatever's on their mind. They tend to fly off the handle and say things that they would never say to somebody if that person were sitting across from them, in the desk next to them. So I just think it takes a little bit more sort of talk on your part as the teacher to help them to understand that these are real people and they have real feelings, and we need to be sensitive to those feelings, and let's talk constructively, but let's not be overly critical or harsh because we're not talking to this person face to face. So again, same idea, but tweaked a little bit for the online medium to make sure that the context, the students are taking into account the rhetorical context of the online classroom.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Christine. It was great to talk with you. Is there anything that you want to say by way of wrap-up, or shall we let you get on with your day?
Just thanks to all the participants for being here, and thanks to you at Pearson for giving me this opportunity. It was really fun. Hope we can do it again sometime.
I'm sure we will. Thanks again, Christine.
Okay, thank you.